greatest influence on you as a professional?
It's very hard to say. So it depends what the profession, how the profession is defined. From your perspective, what aspect of my profession interests you?
I actually, as a leader of a university, of a college.
College, university, yeah. So my models are a mixture of the influence. So I have a strong admiration for the institution builders in the history of American higher education. So they include William Rainey Harper, the founding president of the modern University of Chicago, James Bryan Conant, the president of Harvard, who had a very decisive influence after the war in trying to direct the future of American public education in the post-war period. What I would call activist university college presidents, Robert Maynard Hutchins, the president of the University of Chicago, Theodore Hesburgh, the president of Notre Dame, the Jesuit priest who was a very outspoken public figure. So people in history who seem to me, through the reading of history, to use their positions as university and college presidents on behalf, first of all, educational and scholarly excellence, and also on behalf of the public good, using their positions to foster ideas and policies that place learning and scholarship and quality education at the center of public policy. So I would say they were the individuals who influenced me most. John Kemeny, the president of Dartmouth, great mathematician. And I think those people had a decisive influence. A writer about higher education whom I admired was David Reisman, the sociologist from Harvard. I think those would be people who influenced me. And then, of course, intellectual influences, and they include Hannah Arendt, the political philosopher, who's the teacher of mine as an undergraduate, where there was a sense of the necessity of political engagement as an essential part of realizing one's freedom as a human being. And one sense of responsibility to one's society. So I think those are the people that had the greatest influence on me.
Oh, thank you. You know, I worked at the New School, and one thing I regret is not reading a book from Hannah Arendt. If I were to, what book would you recommend for me?
Well, in the current situation,
yes,
there are two essays in a volume called Between Past and Future. One is What is Freedom, and the other is Truth in Politics. And then of the books, I think the two most relevant are The Human Condition and The Origins of Totalitarianism.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you. I enjoyed reading your editorial in the Times. Thank you for doing that. Next question is, what are the worst and best things that have ever happened to you in your life, and what did you learn from them?
Well, the worst thing that ever happened to me was that I had a daughter who was killed at the age of 8, and that by far is the worst thing that happened to me. And that puts all other disappointments and failures in relief. So what I learned from that is that one needs to find a way to rescue victory from the jaws of defeat, so to speak, to turn disappointment and tragedy not as an excuse for feeling oneself powerless and a victim, but rather to recognize the unintended gift that comes from tragedy and failure. That is like a prize fight. The key is not that you won't get hit and won't get knocked down, but the ability to get up again. And so that is, I think, the most important thing. And the other important thing I learned is that you have to be fully aware of the tenuousness of any plan or any confident notion that you can control what happens, that you're constantly at the mercy of the unexpected.
Thank you. Yes, I liked what Nelson Mandela, I believe, said, was it's not how many times you fall, it's how many times you get up.
Yeah, and the other thing, of course, is that it does bad things happening to you allows you to always balance the relative values that you cherish, and to cease being so dependent on what other people think of you. The other thing that you, at a much minor level, you have to learn how to be confident in the judgment that you make of what you think is right, as opposed to the popular perception that things you do may not always, the right things may not be always the popular things.
Thank you. Do you see, have you looked at Bard College as scaling its programs and reach around the world? How do you, and that word, means different things to different organizations. But if you've, as you've grown Bard College during your time there, what advice would you give to your peers in the nonprofit sector about building an institution?
In my view, it's only my view, building an institution, first and most important thing is to have an idea that you believe in. You have a purpose, that we're not a business where the measurement of success is profit. Measure of success is not wealth. It's not on your balance sheet. Business, the ultimate arbiter seems to be the net worth the balance sheet, the profit and loss, the shareholder value, and success is quantifiable. If you're successful selling a bad product and the public buys a bad product, you're still a success.
Yes.
So in the world as I inhabit, quality is more important than money. And we are closer to churches than we are to businesses. So
yes.
A great church is not one that's rich. Great church is one that reaches its public, that provides comfort and courage and a sense of hope to its parishioners, that mobilizes its community on behalf of virtue and good. It's not the best church isn't the rich church or the biggest church. So one has to be motivated by an idea of what needs to be done, and that once you have a sense of that idea and how it can be delivered, then you have to confront the question of whether you can have that purpose enlarge without diminishing its quality. So the greatest physician in the world is not necessarily the person who reaches the largest number of people.
Yes.
Most effective medical intervention is one that can be replicated, so that if you discover a cure for polio or a major disease, it can be distributed in a way that reaches a mass population. So it is with ideas. So our case, we have several things that the institution has done, which we are seeking to broaden because they're replicable. They include the improvement of secondary education in the United States. So we now have, starting 2018, we'll have 8 high school early colleges around the country in 5 cities. We hope to expand those. The provision of liberal arts college education to prisoners, something we've been able to scale nationally.
I'm very happy to. I've read a bit about those programs and very appreciative that you're doing that.
Yeah, and there's a recent review of 2 books about those programs in the New York Review of Books in this current issue, which I recommend to you. And
thank you.
The third is the extension of a liberal arts approach to first years of university study outside of the United States, and we've been able to expand that to Russia, to the West Bank, to Central Asia, to Europe, and we hope in collaboration with the Fulbright University in Vietnam, to Vietnam. So there is, and then finally to broaden and secure the role of the performing and visual arts inside the university. So these are 4 areas that we focused on, where we as a small institution can expand our so-called footprint by replication of a good idea that we believe is in the best interests of both the national and international community. But the idea is the crucial thing, and the capacity to, some things are not so-called scalable. Intimacy is not scalable, despite Facebook. Friendship is not, real friendship is not scalable, despite Facebook. Great teaching is probably, despite technology, not scalable in the technological sense, but it's scalable in the institutional sense. Um, so one has to be careful not to measure the impact of one has simply by the numbers or by the reach. Saving a single life has merit that can't be undermined by its uniqueness. Do you follow me?
Yes.
And so the smallest thing is a key to larger success. If it's not right in the micro sense, it won't be right in the macro sense.
This is not on the list, but I heard on NPR some public policy person or thinker who was in favor of getting rid of the NEA, basically getting rid of public funding of the arts. And I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but he thought that the arts would, it's the creative field. They would find a way to make arts even without public funding, and that it would open up a new way of making art. I'd love for you to comment on that.
Well, the problem is, first of all, the comment, I didn't hear it, so I can't comment on that. But the idea that the NEA is crucial to the arts in the United States is a little bit of an exaggeration. The NEA has so little funding that it's irrelevant, essentially.
Okay.
It's a symbolic presence. As a symbolic presence, the person who is speaking is being disingenuous. So much of the performing arts is based on a model of culture that is not commercially viable. That includes ballet, it includes opera, it includes all of classical music, it includes jazz. And these are all art forms and theater, art forms where the cost of doing it cannot be passed on to the consumer, individual consumer. So they are not mass media like comparable to television, Netflix type of computer-based entertainment, or the movies, or pop music. And all great art, in the performing area particularly, but also in poetry, in forms of film and photography, are not consonant with commercial market forces. And for a national culture, not to find indirect or direct ways, either by tax subsidies. I don't think the bureaucracy of the NEA is necessarily admirable, but that we as a civilized, industrialized society should not have a mechanism by which to support those arts that historically require subsidy. All the great operas, all the great ballets, all great theater were objects of subsidy. They were not objects of commerce. And greatness and commercial viability are not synonymous. And aesthetic beauty and commercial success are not. So to reduce all of art to a capitalist enterprise of profit or loss is a trivialization of the work of the human imagination. Keats, Byron, even Shakespeare are not commercially viable. And it would be ludicrous to consider a country civilized that had no mechanism for the collective tax-based support of the arts. And how you do it is a different matter. But my hope is that America was at one time a leader in the merger of public and private financing of the arts, and that is a public-private partnership that should continue.
Yes, thank you. I think a lot of people would like to hear that. Actually, you've talked about what your priorities are at the college, and that probably is what you spend the majority of your time on.
No, the majority of my time is spent. The most important thing is to deliver more than rhetorically on the promise of what's called the liberal arts, which are pilloried in the public press falsely as impractical, which they're not. But more important, universities have failed to actually deliver on them in intelligent ways, and we have to find a much better way than we do now. And Bard has been a leader in that, in trying to deliver the substance and the methods of teaching young people the excitement of learning, of critical thought, of skepticism, of inquiry, of research, the skills that the liberal arts prize. And that's been the primary purpose that we have.
Thank you. What, if anything, Leon, is keeping you up at night?
In my case, we have, in our industry, which is higher education, there's been an overemphasis on wealth accumulation as the sign of excellence. So we've spent our time providing the excellence, not the wealth accumulation. So the thing that worries me most, of course, is sustaining traditions of philanthropy. So the new wealth is a little bit overwhelmed by its belief that having become wealthy, people who get rich are smarter than everybody else. There was a time, let's say in the generation of the turn of the century, when patrons, Carnegies, Rockefellers, believed that they were brilliant business people of business, but they turned to religious leaders, intellectual leaders, and viewed them as their peers and trusted them, scientists, educators, to do the equivalent ambitious greatness in their fields through their philanthropy. Now there's a tendency for the rich to believe they know better in things they know nothing about. And that if you're richer, you're smarter. Therefore, you look at someone like myself and they say, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? So this is a noxious form of arrogance. The same arrogance that says that if it doesn't make money, it can't be good. The Ninth Symphony of Beethoven has never made money in any reasonable way, and great opera has never made money, and Swan Lake has never made money. Not even the Nutcracker makes money. So money can't be the only yardstick of value, and mass fame can't be the only yardstick of value. Quantum mechanics and microbiology and biochemistry and molecular biology and genetics are not objects of mass understanding, and they're not popular. They happen to be true and right. So both fame and wealth cannot be the only yardsticks of value. Mass fame.
Thank you. What is your definition of happiness, or what is your philosophy of life?
It would be arrogant for me to assume that I have one. So I would say that I don't presume to have a philosophy of life. I do believe that the criterion for well-being is a belief in the reciprocal character of happiness. That is to say, I am happy only if I've done my part in bettering the well-being and therefore the happiness of others. That the Declaration of Independence, which life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that is a moral obligation. I have to pursue my happiness and have the right to do so. But that happiness has to be defined reciprocally. That is to say, that I cannot be happy when others are not. I cannot live passively in a world where there is injustice, inequality, cruelty, poverty, without actually assisting my fellow human being. So I am not happy in a world where I define my own happiness as purely a private matter. So it is the reciprocal character of having my obligation to others which ensures my happiness. I feel only a sense of worth when I have the conviction that I have acted in a way that benefits others than myself or the immediate members of my family.
Thank you. I appreciate that. All right. A question about, well, let me ask you this. What is the greatest misconception about you?
About me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I am visible enough for there to be any misconceptions. In other words, I'm not the people about whom there are misconceptions are people who have a much larger public profile than I possess. I would say the biggest misconceptions about me are that I'm gifted, which I'm not. I'm just hardworking. There are misconceptions that I'm arrogant, which I'm not. I would say that I think that other misconceptions that I do many things. I'm actually a creature of unbelievable consistency and habit. I've done the same thing all my life, and they're very limited. I do a very limited number of things. I do fewer things than most people do. I have no hobbies. I play no sports. I have no. I don't. I am a fanatical worker. So I've put all my eggs in a very few baskets.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This is on the topic of talent management. How important is it to find the right people for your board, and what qualities do you seek, and how successful have you been at matching those qualities?
Well, the board is a very specific instrument. The general proposition is that in running an organization, the most important characteristic is the ability to recruit and motivate people who are better than yourself. Mm-hmm. So a trick to building an organization is people. And the people have to be people of ambition, quality, and you have to give them both authority, do not micromanage, and to give them visibility. So we've been successful as an institution insofar as we've been successful by recruiting and by giving latitude and freedom and independence and autonomy and room to maneuver of first-rate people, whether they be on the faculty or the administration. When it comes to the board, there is an extra quality, which is, in American institutions, the board is a crucial instrument for raising money. And therefore, you have to have people on the board for whom raising money is something they enjoy, they're good at, and don't shy away from. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. A good board has to be one that takes responsibility for the bottom line by doing more than insisting, rightly so, on efficiency and financial probity and responsible financial management. It also has to take a hand in responsibility in providing the necessary supplement to so-called earned income. So whether you're in an arts organization, which I also am responsible for, it's beyond the ticket sales or the sales of products that emerge from your primary responsibility, let's say a museum shop, and that a key part of that income is philanthropy. And a board has to be responsible, take the primary responsibility for that philanthropy.
I'm just curious. It's not on the list, but I recall that the Fisher Center had a, if I'm correct, a give-get of $50,000. Is that correct? And then is there also one for the Bard College Board?
There's none for the Bard College Board. The one at the Fisher Center Board was a tactical effort because it was a new organization and without a defined constituency. Local, in the arts, it was a newcomer, and therefore the $50,000 floor limit was put as a price of membership. But in the Bard Board, there is no minimum because I believe minimums can have the impact of depressing philanthropy. And so they have a tendency to define the need to participate too narrowly. So I'm not a real fan of minimums.
Thank you. You know, I use the fact Bethel Woods Center for the Arts has been a client for a long time, and I helped them create a 501c3 separate from the Gary Foundation, and including an independent board. And we started off with a $50,000 give-get in the middle of Sullivan County, and we did it with 8 people in the beginning.
I mean, it depends on the scope of the organization, the number and relationship. But a very good board is one, for example, in which there is a lead giver that gives millions, but one of the reasons she or he gives millions is because the other members of the board provide the motivation for that single person. So one of the most productive members of our board historically was an individual whose own giving is very low by absolute numbers, but whose role was crucial in persuading someone to give tens of millions of dollars.
Yes. What is the most important thing you tell young people who are thinking about making careers in the nonprofit sector?
To stop thinking about careers and think about what they want to do with their lives. No one should go into the not-for-profit sector unless they're motivated by some level of idealism, a desire to have the chance to change the definition of reality. So they have to go in with an ambition to alter the framework of what's considered realistic. So what dreaming and daydreaming is an important part of having a career in this area. So that you have to believe in something and believe something should be different from the way you have found it. And so I learned this. I was given the opportunity in my 20s, but the opportunity I was given was considered by everybody unrealistic. I became president of a college whom the state of New York put out a warning that year that it would close within 12 months of my appointment.
It was Franconia, right?
Oh, that's Bard. And I'm there 42 years later. So when I took the job, no one considered the job I was given to have any realistic chance of success. So the trick you have to have in this business, in this line of work, is to believe that you can alter what other smart people consider to be realistic. No one in the profession considered Bard College to be a viable institution. or to be capable of doing anything of any value. Is why it was going under and why they hired a young, inexperienced, unqualified person to lead it. I was given an opportunity because nobody else wanted it. I was not hired because they thought I was the right person. I was hired because they were desperate. And the choice was either hire me or close.
Yeah, I had forgotten that Bard was in such dire straits those years ago.
That's good that you forgot that. The reality is that the other trick in any career is not to follow an imitative path, to see opportunity, just like in business, where other people don't. The old adage that, if you invested $5,000 in Amazon 20 years ago, or whenever it was, it would be worth $1 million now. Well, the reason so few people did is because it went against conventional wisdom. Trick is always to think in a somewhat contrarian manner. Don't follow the crowd. Pull the crowd toward you. Go against the grain.
Thank you. What new opportunities do you see for Bard in the next 5 years?
Well, I think the opportunities for Bard are defined by the change in the political realities of the United States. So my view, the catastrophic turn of events in the presidential election represents an opportunity for Bard. An opportunity for Bard to make its case, to use the dislocation and the disruption in the business as usual, to find opportunities to set the bar higher for the quality of education, for the importance of the arts, for the significance of the pursuit of science, scholarship, research, and the freedom of the individual, and to improve the opportunities for civil liberties and tolerance by being in the opposition and by being a point of resistance against the spread of hate, xenophobia, and falsehood.
Thank you. I do have to tell you a joke. Do you know who is being appointed as U.S. Surgeon General?
No.
Joe Camel.
Oh, great.
Humor helps me.
Humor. Retaining your sense of humor is an essential part of this business, and in that, I come from a very helpful tradition, and that is that it has been one of the signal characteristics of the Jewish tradition that it has been able to laugh and find humor in darkness.
Yes. I have a couple of policy-oriented questions for you. We're in the midst of what could be called a national conversation about race and racial equity, racial inequity. What is BARD doing, both internally and externally, to address racial inequity?
BARD has about 5,700 degree candidates under its jurisdiction. Over half of them are of color, non-white. Its primary audience in the high schools, that early colleges that it runs, and in the prison program, and abroad are not white Caucasian. Number one. Number two, it has in the elite colleges, it's the third highest minority enrollment on its main campus. It has over 20% of its student body are eligible for Pell Grants. So a major priority for the institution is to provide, to be a provider of high-quality higher education to the underserved and the discriminated. And so it is a major part of its mission.
Do you have any tips for your peers when it comes to diversifying your board?
I think the diversity of the board is a symbolic matter. I don't think it should be an imposed requirement. Since inequality is coordinated with race, there is nothing wrong with having a generous board of white folk putting money into helping those who are not white. So I think that it is important to have minority voices and voices of people of color on a board, but it is not itself an insurance. Not all people of color think alike, as Ben Carson is a good example of that. And therefore, I resist a racial quota attitude. That I think it's not. It is important to hear different points of view, but the diversity of points of view on a board don't necessarily correlate with race. So that a large portion of the African American community, the community of color in the United States, is conservative in many of its views, socially and politically and financially, as it should be. And so the color of one's skin or one's ethnicity is not an insurance of intellectual diversity. So I think imposing that diversity is on a racial question is people are too concerned with the appearance of things. It's the reality of things that's important. The only diversity that I think is absolutely probably cuts across race and class is gender. And that gender diversity seems to be absolutely essential to have. Equity between the genders.
That's very helpful. Thank you. There was a study conducted by U.S. Trust in 2016 showing that high net worth individuals have greater confidence in individuals and in nonprofits than they do in government, in the president or executive branch or in Congress. With a new administration in Congress, what role should the nonprofit sector and organizations like BARD play over the next 2 to 4 years?
First of all, the low confidence in people in public life is a tragedy, but a well-earned one. It's a tragedy that is merited. One of the problems in the United States is that we've made it impossible for people of quality to enter politics. The politics is completely corrupted by the power of wealth, and also the corruption of journalism, by which both hypocrisy and newsworthiness and notoriety, as well as a puritanical, prurient interest in the private lives. Now, it hasn't happened to hurt Donald Trump, but it hurt Bill Clinton, and it's an inconsistent yardstick. So the current president has gotten away with things that no other politician would ever have gotten away with, both in venality, corruption, and immorality. So the quality of people in public life in the United States is shockingly low. So the fact is that those of us not in politics have a higher respect rating is I'm pleased to hear it, but I take no comfort in it. What leaders of not-for-profit institutions need to do is to be in the public eye, standing for things they believe in, and not hide behind their jobs, narrowly defined, keeping their nose close to their grindstones, without using their public positions as voices for what they believe to be right.
Thank you.
Speak out is what I would say to them.
Yes. Here's another question. The New York Times reported, and I'm interested in this in particular because of my work in both New York City and in upstate New York in the Catskills. The New York Times reported the widening political divergence between cities and small-town America reflects a growing alienation between the two groups, in a sense perhaps accurate, that their fates are not connected. What role could the nonprofit sector play to help the two groups find greater common ground?
Well, we have an obligation, I think, those of us in the university, to find a way to speak to people who disagree with us, who fear us, who think of us as out-of-touch elites, and stop having the arrogance of a kind of smug superiority, which we don't possess, or a smug liberalism in the case of those of us who are in opposition to, let's say, the policies of the Trump administration or the Republican Party. We have to be able to speak plainly and directly and persuasively to open a conversation with people who suspect us and mistrust us and think we're up to no good, who believe us not to be patriotic, not to be have concerns about the fact that, for example, in the Rust Belt states, the abandoned cities of the former industrial America, that we don't care about their well-being. And it is one of the faults of the Democratic Party that they abandoned this constituency and lost their capacity to talk to them, especially with the decline of unions and of industrial America. And this was a failure to communicate with people who disagree and who have a different tradition. Those of us who work in rural areas pride ourselves in one of the things we've tried to do at BARD is to improve the conversation by providing services, by opening lines of communication, working collaboratively with constituencies and communities with which we may actually disagree on substantive matters. For a long time, we, to our peril, ignored communities of faith, by believing somehow that religion was a dying phenomenon. It turned out it wasn't a dying phenomenon. And
very good point.
We have to communicate with people who legitimately find comfort in faith and in communities of faith.
That's very helpful.
The faith-based communities,
even up where I am here in the Catskills.
Faith-based communities are crucial, will be crucial allies in the fight against limiting refugees and deriding immigrants and foreigners. Community of faith is crucial to opening a welcoming and trusting relationship with our Mexican neighbors and the immigrants to Mexico. The community of faith will be crucial to protecting the rights of persons, even if they are illegal immigrants. The Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment speak about persons, not citizens.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. I can actually use that in my work. Okay, let's see. We're getting down to the end. If there was one thing you could say to your colleagues at leading grant-making foundations, what would it be?
Give many more large focus to philanthropy. Make large grants, take large bets, to not spread the money so thinly that it makes no difference to the organizations, to stop this pattern of getting stuff started but not sustaining it, to be more committed to sustaining the institutions in civil society that protect the fundamental values of the country, to be less interested in projects and more interested in institutional longevity and well-being.
Perfect. Thank you. Finally, the best jokes have some truth behind them. What is your favorite joke about your profession or the nonprofit sector?
So my favorite joke is a somewhat elaborate one. It tells a story about a Russian prince in the 19th century who has a large land holdings, and one day he wakes up and turns to his major domo and says, "Don't we have a Jewish village on our property, in our lands?" And he says, "Yes." He says, "Well, go to the Jewish village and bring me the smartest Jew in the village. I want to see him." So major domo goes to the village, and the village is sort of a little frightened. They live in a ghetto, and they're frightened. Why the major domo? So they receive the major domo, and then they say, "Wait a moment," and they all gather together for a collective discussion. What are they going to do with this bizarre request? So they decide to elect one of their own as the smartest person in the village. Some poor individual gets anointed with this task, and they give him a suit, and they send him back with the major domo. He's ushered into the major domo's living room, and there the major domo's, the prince's living room, and the prince is on a couch and lounging around, and he's introduced, and he says, "So you're the smartest Jew in the village?" And the guy says, "Well, that's my official role. I can't say that I am, but that they told me that's the role I'm going to play." He says, "Okay, you see, I have a big dog here. There's a dog lying on the ground." He says, "I want you to teach the dog to talk." So the Jew says, "Your Highness, that's very nice of you, but I can't teach the dog to talk. I can't teach a dog to talk." He says, "Listen, I know you Jews, you're very crafty. Don't give me excuses. You teach the dog to talk, or the consequences on your community and your village will be severe." So it says, "Your Highness, please have mercy on me. This is just impossible. It can't be done." He says, "No, I don't hear any excuses." He says, please, it's impossible." He said, "Look, I'm a kind man," says the prince. "I understand your hesitation, so I'll make a deal with you. I'll give you 3 years. You can take the dog, and you come back in 3 years. And make sure you come back, and the dog should talk." He says, "Your Highness, 3 years, 6 years, 8, it's irrelevant. It's just not possible. You're setting me up for failure, my people for failure. It's just not possible." He says, "Listen, this is my best offer. Take it or leave it. You know the consequences." So the poor guy says, "What can you do?" He says, okay. So he comes back with the dog.
In 3 years.
And he explains the story to the people. Mm-hmm. And they say, "You idiot, you're going to get us killed." He says, "You can't. It's impossible. 3 years, 8 years, we're headed for disaster." He says, "Wait a moment." He says, 3 years is a long time. There are many possibilities. First of all, in the 3 years, the prince can die, and the whole thing is forgotten. Or the dog can die. Or I can die. And maybe the dog will talk. So the punchline, "Maybe the dog will talk," is my favorite joke. Never say never.
Thank you. Can you still hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That was wonderful. Thank you. Has anyone ever told you that you have the same? The sound of your voice is a lot like Tom Brokaw's.
Tom Brokaw.
Yeah.
I know. I would never have. No one has ever said it. But
yeah.
Is he still around?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Who does he work for now?
I see him every once in a while being interviewed by on news shows, NPR and MSNBC, 60 Minutes.
Used to be NBC, no?
Right. Right. Yeah.
I don't think I know the name, but I don't have any association with him really.
Well, this is wonderful. We'll, if we want to highlight a quote, we'll certainly run it by you. We're hoping to wrap up the interviews by March. I'm happy to say that the Stephen Heinz, I think his last name is pronounced that way, from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund has said yes. So we're happy about that.
He's a wonderful guy. Wonderful
yeah.
guy, and he's a good person to ask about the worst thing that happened to him, because he is an example. I deeply admire him. He's a friend, and he had a terrible disease. He had a bone marrow transplant and had a Guillain-Barré. In addition to that, he survived it, got back to work, he overcame an incredible personal and medical challenge with uncommon dignity and courage.
Oh, thank you. That's
Tell
good
him
to know.
I said so.
I will. Thank you. And please send my regards to Susan Gillespie. I haven't talked with her in quite some time.
I will.
And one of your young staff members at Tone reached out to us. We worked with Words Without Borders for a little while, and I'm still in touch with Jim Ottaway. He's been helpful to me over the years on projects.
Man. Terrific
yeah,
man.
yeah.
Great trustee.
So, and I continue to read about BARD, and I'm just always very proud to have been a part of it, and very proud of what you continue to do there. So,
our best.
Hope our paths will cross again in the future.
Where are you in the Catskills?
Well, I'm living in New York City still, home office, and then also in the Catskills.
Where?
On the Willowweemock River, just north of Livingston Manor.
Livingston Manor. So which side? Is that
it's
near the Emerson?
No. Much further. It's the southwestern edge of the Catskills in Sullivan County, past Monticello on Route 17. And before Roscoe.
Oh, yeah. It's the old Borscht Belt.
Yes.
Yeah. Sad place.
Well, it's, the things are improving business-wise. I don't know for how long, maybe just a few years after the casinos and the other businesses get built. Before
we're active in Woodburn, and which is
the prison there.
Yeah, we have a program there, and also in Napanock in Eastern Correctional.
One of my dear friends and also a generous philanthropist here actually teaches in one of the other programs up here, having to do with what is it, SUNY Sullivan?
Oh, good.
So there's nice connection there, and Jim Ottaway's foundation gave a lovely small grant to a kids high school kids newspaper project up here in Livingston Manor.
That was their business, sure.
Yeah. And we do the leadership summit. It's the sixth in my free time, and it's the 6th year that we're doing that at Bethel Woods, focusing on building healthier communities and encouraging nonprofits to collaborate with both business and government up here to try to get something done. One of the big big issue for me for up here is how disproportionate the private foundation funding goes to urban areas compared to rural areas, and the issues up in rural New York have very much in common with the issues of inner cities, and yet they don't have the same number of people, but I just think that foundations should be spending be spreading their money out more outside of the urban areas.
Okay. Good.
So well, thank you, and I hope to see you.
Hope to see you soon. You take care of yourself.
You too.
Okay. Thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.